Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
Welcome back, travelers, and welcome to our solo episode. Now, in the previous episode, you heard me in conversation with Lieutenant General retired H.R. McMaster. We covered the gamut. We talked about paradox, we talked about power, and the hard truths that sit beneath American strategy. Today, it's just you and me. No guests, no crossfire, just a moment to step back and take stock. Because when you strip away doctrine, headlines, and slogans, I think a quieter question still remains. What happens when a nation with unmatched power and force begins to lose its grip on purpose, on legitimacy, and on direction? This episode is about that question. It's about the tragedy of what I call a superforce, a country that can still act everywhere, from the streets of Minneapolis to the skies over Yemen, but at the same time struggles to explain why, and increasingly struggles to bring its own people along. Now, what is a superforce? What do I mean? Let's start simple. First, a superpower. A superpower shapes the world not just through strength, but through consent, earned consent. Others follow. Why? Because they want to, or because the system makes sense. Think post-war Europe. Think the Marshall Plan, NATO, particularly in its early decades. Now, a superforce is different. A superforce can strike anywhere. It can deploy instantly. It can coerce, sanction, surveil, and dominate tactically. We see it in drone campaigns that eliminate targets but leave governance vacuums behind, in sanctions regimes that punish economies faster than they change behavior. Force replaces influence when we're talking about a superforce. Speed replaces patience. Control, that replaces legitimacy. That's not a moral judgment. It's a functional distinction. And today, America increasingly behaves like a superforce, immensely capable, often effective in the short term, but strategically adrift, and increasingly operating off book. That is contrary and in contradiction to the very stabilizing and legitimizing norms and principles, rules and decision-making processes and procedures that we created and have led over a century. Now, I want to talk a little bit about tragedy, almost in a Shakespearean or an Aristotelian sense, right? And where tragedy begins, because this is an American story of tragedy, right? In that, again, that Shakespearean sense. Tragedy doesn't mean failure in that sense. In the classical sense, tragedy means strength, all of a sudden, apparently, becoming the source of weakness, right? Think Hamlet, think King Lear, right? America's tragedy is not that we're weak. It's that we are strong without alignment. We maintain global commitments without shared domestic consensus. Doing things like supporting Ukraine militarily, while struggling to explain the end game to voters at home. We wield power without a stable theory of legitimacy. Things like asserting hemispheric dominance in and across the Caribbean, while at the same time insisting we oppose spheres of influence elsewhere and done by others. We act faster than our institutions can actually learn. Things like launching operations, tariffs, withdrawals, and deals with little capacity for after-action corrections. Again, we have a learning problem. We outspeed our learning. We're everywhere, but at the same time, in many ways, nowhere for long enough with enough. We're not always coherent wherever we are. This is how overextension can happen. Not all at once, but quietly, through habit, through inertia, through the belief that capability can substitute for clarity. It can't. Now, over the past year, I've used the phrase the great unmooring a lot. You've heard me mention it on this program, the Civic Brief. You've seen it in my writings on the Substack companion newsletter, compound security unlocked. It describes, when I use that term, the Great Unmooring, I intend it to describe a world losing its anchors, right? Just for example, governments falling or hardening overnight, ranging from the Sahel to Eastern Europe. Alliances wobbling under pressure as burden sharing becomes bargaining. Markets swinging on political rumor and tariff announcements. Norms dissolving faster than new ones form. Whether we're talking about Gaza, the South China Sea, or our own cities and our own judicial courts. In that world, old assumptions fail. Presence no longer equals influence. Ask anyone watching U.S. naval patrols coexisting with Chinese port deals. Deterrence no longer guarantees stability. Ask Ukraine, or Israel, or Taiwan. Dominance no longer ensures leadership. Ask our closest allies. Navigating, increasingly, hedging strategies against us. And here's the harder part. The Great Unmooring doesn't just test rivals. It tests us. It asks whether America still knows what it stands for. And if she does, what that thing we stand for is still liberal and democratic. It asks whether America can translate power into something legitimate and durable, worth and worthy of enduring. Now there's a paradox amid this superforce. And here it is, at the center of this moment. The more America relies on force alone, the more brittle its leadership becomes. Tactical success, masking strategic erosion. We eliminate leaders, but movements regenerate. We cut deals, but partners continue to hedge. We withdraw institutions. We withdraw from them, then pay more later in crisis response. Border pressure or emergency deployments. Deals replace long-standing enduring relationships. Short-term wins generate long-term instabilities. And we can see it. We see it when military action solves a problem but creates three more in its solution. For example, in post-strike Yemen or Libya. We see it when economic coercion accelerates global hedging as countries seek alternatives to the dollar system. We see it when withdrawal from institutions save money in the short term but cost influence, ranging from climate coordination to development finance. And we see it when domestic polarization bleeds into foreign credibility, as allies watch our elections more closely than our strategy papers. A superforce can win encounters. We do. But systems are not encounters. They require trust, predictability, legitimacy. And without those, power still moves, but it no longer holds. Now, I want to talk about this paradox again in terms of America as a superforce. And at the root of that paradox is an illiberalism, a growing illiberalism. This paradox at the heart of our current moment, one that exposes a dangerous crack in America's claim to moral authority. On the one hand, we're told that threats against federal ICE agents justify the expanded use of force, not only against undocumented migrants, but potentially against American citizens themselves. The state, we're told, must respond decisively when federal authority is challenged. Yet at the same standard collapses when applied closer to home. Let's revisit January 6th. The January 6th insurrection was a direct organized assault on constitutional order, on Congress, on the peaceful transfer of power, on the republic itself. And still, many of those who now argue for force in the name of law and order resist applying that same logic to the perpetrators of that January 6th violence. Force becomes, it becomes conditional. Accountability becomes selective. And that same paradox then deepens abroad. The president speaks, correctly I think, of the Iranian regime's brutality against peaceful protesters as justification for some form and some type and style of U.S. action. That logic is familiar and sound. A state that represses lawful dissent forfeits moral legitimacy. I might restate that. I might state that again. A state that represses lawful dissent forfeits moral legitimacy. Here's the problem. That same logic is being denied right here at home. When American citizens protest lawfully and constitutionally and are met with militarized policing, mass arrest, or the criminalization of dissent, the administration refuses, increasingly so, to see the parallel. Illiberalism, it seems, is only a problem when someone else practices it. This, my friends, is a superforce contradiction. A superpower that applies force selectively, legality strategically, and moral reasoning asymmetrically ceases to be a stabilizing force. It becomes something else. A state that uses power to protect itself from accountability rather than to protect the constitutional order for we the people. Superforce is not measured by how hard a state can strike, but by whether it submits itself to the same rules it enforces on others. When a government demands obedience without reciprocity, force without consistency, and loyalty without accountability, it doesn't protect strength and it doesn't project strength. It projects fear of its own people. And that historically is not the mark of a confident republic, but of one crossing an illiberal threshold. Let's talk a little bit more about this paradoxical power and the way through it. What's the alternative to what I've laid out so far? It's not weakness. The alternative is not going into a retreat. And it's not nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. It's what I call paradoxical power, real power. Paradoxical power begins by admitting contradiction instead of denying it. That America can be strong and at the same time limited. In fact, that strength is a restrained and limited thing. That leadership requires restraint, especially in moments of domestic strain. That legitimacy is not decoration. It's actual infrastructure. It asks different questions. Not can we act, but what does action do to the system? Not did it work, but what did it cost downstream? Not are we feared, but are we trusted enough to lead when the next crisis hits? Paradoxical power doesn't eliminate tension. It manages it deliberately. Now, if renewal is possible, and I believe it is, I truly do, it won't come from grand declarations or new slogans. I think it'll come from 4 quiet shifts. The first, legitimacy as a metric, not an afterthought, both at home and abroad. Second, strategy aligned to capacity, not ambition alone, especially industrial and civic capacity. Third, integration over dominance, defense, diplomacy, development, and commercial, pulling together, not competing. And fourth, fewer commitments per se, but all of them better kept. Clear priorities instead of everywhere at once presence. This is not decline. This is not the path or the stuff of decline. It's recalibration. A humbler America can be sharper. A more focused America can be stronger in real terms. And a more legitimate America can still lead with others following. Now, in other segments and other episodes, you witness me, you take part in me, particularly with guests, offering them and really kind of putting them into the pressure cooker of a lightning round of questions for reflection. I figured today I might begin to end this episode by putting myself on my own hot seat, right? So I'm gonna close or begin to close with a brief reflection, some answers to my own lightning round questions. So here are a few. Here are 5. First, what paradox must we admit? I'd answer, power without legitimacy accelerates decay, right? What might be one domain where the superforce illusion is fading? I might say to look at global economics, where coercion breeds alternatives faster than compliance. What might be one metric to replace presence being equated to power? Answer, resilience under stress. Who bends without breaking? Focusing there. What's one concept Americans must relearn about strategy? My answer would be not everything that can be done should be done. And fifth, what and how might I title the next American era limited to 5 words? And this is a hard one for me, folks, because you know me by now. I am cursed and gifted with the gift of gab. More curse than gift sometimes. What will be my answer in 5 words or less? Power, relearned the hard way, right? So let me now really begin to close by offering this. America's story has never been about perfection. Never has, never will be. It's always been about some type of correction, though. The tragedy of a superforce is not inevitable decline. It's refusing to adjust while there's still time. Folks, this has been the Civic Brief. I'm still Ike Wilson. Stay thoughtful, stay engaged, and above all, stay strategic. For nation and the world, not self. Cheers.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.